sorting out the banks. I'll give way.
I'm grateful. By far the most robust banking system in the Western world is the Canadian banking system, where retail and investment banking is not split. So why is the honourable member and his right honourable friend from Twickenham so fixated on splitting up banks into retail and investment when that is clearly not the problem as demonstrated by the robustness of the Canadian system?
Mr. Speaker, with respect, I will heed the views of the Governor of the Bank of England on this issue slightly more seriously than his views. He makes a simple, compelling case starting from first principles. Banking, retail banking, keeping people's deposits safe, lending prudently to businesses and households should not be mixed up with the high-risk, over-leveraged business model of casino banking. Full stop, simple as that. Next, we have an improving schools bill, which is highly unlikely to improve schools. Because if the government wanted to improve skills, they would take bureaucracy away from teachers, not impose more. This is the 12th education bill in as many years. So why does the government imagine this one will work where none of the others did? Then there's the police, crime and private security bill that will yet again tweak the over-tweaked ASBO regime. Is it not time for this government to accept that passing laws doesn't cut crime? More police officers out on the beat do. Worst of all, Mr. Speaker, in this Queen's speech, we have some bills which cynically raise expectations but which the government knows will deliver far less than they're promising. The bill to outlaw cluster actually only outlaw some cluster bombs. And the bill supposedly to deliver free personal care. After the Prime Minister's media interviews this morning, there will be tens of thousands of elderly people up and down Britain who have been led to believe that they will be properly looked after from now on. Yet it won't happen. He has raised the hopes of some of the most vulnerable people in this country when he knows perfectly well that this bill will only offer free personal care to a fraction of those people struggling to pay for the help they need. So what, Mr. Speaker, should this Parliament be doing in its final weeks? The Queen's speech...
To the right honourable gentleman, he didn't mention the digital economy bill. Surely he would be supporting the measures in that bill which will implement for the first time the recommendations of the Byron report into violent video games. He must accept that there is a need for legislation to deal with these issues. We can't just talk about expenses all the time.
Absolutely not, and I haven't, and I accept, of course, that we will look at the bills that are in this Queen's speech and scrutinise them, support them or oppose them in the way that is the duty of a responsible opposition party. But if I could just go back to the basic question of what this Queen's speech should be doing in the very, very little time available to this Parliament. Shall give way.
Speaker, I'm very grateful to the leader of the Liberal Democrats. How big a reduction in the deficit would he recommend, and what should the balance be between expenditure cuts and tax rises?
We accept that the most important thing is to be credible on any plan to fill the structural deficit. And that simply passing a law saying you're going to halve the deficit over the next 4 years is irrelevant if you don't spell out the different choices. And that is why, on these benches, we have advocated big, difficult, bold decisions. Not renewing, like for like, the Trident nuclear missile system. Ending tax credits provided to above-average income families. Ending the Child Trust Fund, £250 to every 18-year-old in this country. Not because these are popular, but because they're difficult. We need to spell out these choices in order to be credible in the deficit reduction programme, which is absolutely necessary. But what should the Parliament be doing, Mr. Speaker, in these final weeks? The Queen's speech should have been replaced, in our view, by an emergency programme of political reform. After the expenses scandal, this Parliament has destroyed its own legitimacy. The one gift this failed Parliament can, in the few weeks remaining to it, give to its successor is a fresh start. When you move out of a house, you clean it for the people moving in. This must be the last and final task of this rump Parliament. And let me set out in just a few words what real reform would look like, what the focus of the last 70 days of this Parliament should have been. We should introduce a power of recall, so people can sack any MP found guilty of serious misconduct. All candidates in the next election should declare their financial interests, as Sir Christopher Kelly demanded. We should have real action to reform the House of Lords, not yet more delaying tactics from this draft legislation proposed in today's Queen's speech, and changes to House of Commons procedure to reduce executive power. We should agree total change to party funding, so big money and the whiff of corruption it brings are removed from politics for good, and introduced fixed-term parliaments so the voters can never again be toyed with by a Prime Minister planning an election timetable to save his or her own skin. And finally, we should have real action on electoral reform so every citizen knows that their vote counts. These changes, of course, they'd be a tall order, but with political will, they could transform our threadbare democratic institutions. Instead of being just a sorry footnote to a shameful year at Westminster, these months could have been a moment of important and permanent change in British political history. But after today's Queen's speech, we now know that that opportunity to do the right thing has been squandered yet again by this government. Mr. Charles Clark.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for calling me. Can I firstly join the congratulations that have come from all sides of the House for the proposer and seconder of this Queen's speech. They were both entertaining, witty and powerful. I know both the members well, and I think they did themselves and everybody else credit. Unfortunately, I can't say the same, Mr. Speaker, for the speech of the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition. He has led the most extraordinary attack on the Queen's speech, writing yesterday in the Times, and I quote, that we will see a Prime Minister playing politics with the biggest constitutional event of the year. His discovery, Mr. Speaker, that the government's legislative programme is political is truly bizarre. His stance can surely only be explained by his fear of exposing to debate his own party's lack of clear policies, programme or philosophy. The fact is that almost all legislation is political, and it indeed should be political, as it expresses values and beliefs that underlie our society. The question is not whether the Queen's speech is political, but whether its politics are right. This legislative programme comes at the end of a Parliament elected in 2005, during which there have been enormous and in many ways unpredictable changes in our national life.